The sound of metal clanging shut echoed through the neighborhood. Clank! Everyone turned to look. There I was, standing beside the only gate that led into our cul-de-sac, a padlock in my hand and a smile on my face. Behind me, the freshly painted sign read, "Private access entry by permission only." Karen's face turned red. Her jaw dropped so wide I thought she might swallow a fly. You can't do that," she screamed, pointing at me with trembling hands. "Oh, but I already did," I said calmly. The entire HOA board stood frozen, their clipboards still in hand, realizing that without my permission, no one could drive into the neighborhood, not even them. And that's when it really hit them. I owned the only access point into the community. But before I tell you how I ended up buying the only gate the HOA used to boss everyone around, let me take you back to how all this started, back to when Karen first decided that my yard was somehow her business. When I first moved into Maplewood Estates, I thought I'd found my dream home. Quiet streets, tall oak trees, and friendly neighbors who waved when you walked your dog. I didn't even mind that it had an HOA. Everyone said it was a small, relaxed one. I was wrong. At first, things were fine. I spent weekends planting flowers in my front yard, fixing the fence, and setting up a small vegetable garden. Then, one bright Saturday morning, I saw her, Karen. You couldn't miss her. She wore big sunglasses, a floral visor, and always carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. She was the president of the HOA, and she introduced herself like a police officer introducing a warrant. "Hi, I'm Karen, HOA president. I just wanted to remind you about the lawn regulations." I smiled politely. "Oh sure, I read them. I think I'm good." She frowned, scanning my yard like a detective. "Your grass is half an inch too tall," she said seriously, as if she'd just found stolen treasure. I chuckled, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. That's how it started: the letters, the warnings, the friendly visits. She always found something to complain about: my trash cans being visible from the street, my garden hose not coiled properly, even the color of my mailbox. Still, I tried to be kind. I offered her fresh tomatoes from my garden once, thinking it might make her warm up to me. She refused them and said, "Bribery doesn't work with the HOA." That's when I realized kindness didn't work with Karen. One day, I came home early from work and caught her in my yard, not standing on the sidewalk, not at my door in my yard. She was measuring my fence with a tape measure. "Excuse me?" I said. She jumped like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh, I was just checking if your fence complies with the neighborhood height requirement." I crossed my arms. "You can't just walk into someone's property without permission." "I'm the HOA president," she said, like that made her above the law. "That doesn't mean you can trespass." She frowned, scribbled something on her clipboard, and said, "I'll make a note of your attitude." Then she walked away. I stood there stunned. My attitude? That night, I told my neighbor, Jim, about what happened. Jim had lived there for 15 years. He sighed and said, "Yeah, Karen's been like that forever. She used to cut people's flowers if they grew over the property line." I laughed at first until I realized he wasn't joking. Things got worse. Every few days, I'd notice signs that someone had been in my yard. Footprints near the garden. My gate left slightly open. My hose moved. I decided to set up a small security camera by the back gate. Sure enough, 2 days later, I caught her again. She was bending down near my tomato plants, taking pictures. That's when I'd had enough. The next HOA meeting, I stood up and said calmly, "If anyone, including board members, steps onto my property again without permission, I'll consider it trespassing and contact the police." Karen laughed out loud in front of everyone. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. The HOA has the right to inspect yards." A few of the neighbors looked uneasy. One whispered, "Does it though?" The room grew tense. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Not without notice, not without my consent." She smirked and said, "We'll see about that." A week later, I came home to find her inside my yard again, this time dragging a measuring wheel across my grass. My gate had been forced open. The latch was broken. That was it. I called out, "Karen, you're trespassing again." She didn't even look up. "I have the right to ensure property compliance." I pulled out my phone. "Then you won't mind if the police confirm that?" Her face went pale. She dropped her measuring wheel and left without saying a word. That night, I installed a brand new, reinforced gate, the kind that locks automatically. I even added a camera with motion detection. But I didn't know yet that the biggest twist was still coming. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. It was from the HOA. "Dear homeowner," it read, You are required to remove the new gate you've installed as it obstructs community access. Community access? What community? It was my yard. I stormed over to the HOA office. Karen greeted me with her fake smile. I told you that gate wasn't allowed, she said sweetly. You mean the one I built to stop you from breaking in? I snapped. Her expression hardened. This attitude is not appropriate for a community member. I leaned closer. You stopped being a community member when you broke my gate. She crossed her arms. You'll regret this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words. I didn't want a war, I just wanted peace. But peace clearly wasn't something Karen understood. That's when I started digging. I looked up property maps of the neighborhood, every house, every shared path, every access point. That's when I noticed something strange. The entire HOA community had only one official road entrance. And guess who owned the small strip of land that the gate stood on? Not the HOA. Not the city. It was privately owned. By the old man who'd sold me my house. And that little strip less than 30 feet wide was technically part of my property. I blinked, double-checked, and laughed out loud. Karen had been walking through my land every day to get into the neighborhood. And that's when an idea began to form. Over the next few days, I made a few quiet calls to the county clerk's office. I confirmed the boundary lines, reviewed the deed, and found that yes, the HOA didn't legally own the access point. The old man had transferred it to me when I bought my property. No one had realized it because the gate was open to everyone for years. But now that it was officially mine, I could control who used it. I took my savings, hired a contractor, and had a new, custom-made security gate, installed heavy-duty steel, automated with code access, and camera monitored. When the HOA members saw it go up, they were confused. Karen stormed over immediately. What's the meaning of this? She barked. I simply said, this is private property. From now on, anyone entering or leaving needs permission from the landowner, me. Her eyes widened. You can't. I just smiled. I already did. And when I locked that gate for the first time, the entire neighborhood fell silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. But oh, this was just the beginning. Where are you watching from? The first morning after I installed the gate felt surreal. The sunlight stretched over my yard, glinting off the steel bars and the shiny new keypad. I half expected to wake up from a dream, but it wasn't a dream, it was reality. My property. My rules. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. Of course, peace didn't last long. By 8 a.m., Karen appeared at the edge of the gate, hands on her hips, tapping her clipboard like she was trying to summon some kind of HOA army from thin air. I walked to the window, coffee in hand, just observing her ridiculous parade. You can't just lock this, she yelled. I opened the window. Actually, I can. I own this access. Her jaw dropped, but she quickly recovered her signature smirk. This is an outrage. I will have the board enforce the rules. I took a sip of coffee. You mean the board that can't even step onto my property without my permission? Her eyes narrowed. She didn't say another word, she just turned and stomped away. But I knew she wasn't gone. Not even close. The next few days were interesting. Some neighbors peeked curiously at the new gate. Some nodded in approval. And a few even whispered. Finally, someone stood up to her. But Karen? She had turned my front yard into her personal obsession. I caught her twice in the security footage. First, she tried to peek over the top of the gate with binoculars, a full-on spy act. Second, she parked on the street and circled around the gate like a shark, trying to see if she could somehow bypass it. Every time I watched the videos, I felt a mixture of amusement and disbelief. This woman is relentless. Then came the threatening letters. The HOA started sending official-looking notices in big, bold letters. Remove the gate immediately, or face legal action. Each envelope smelled faintly of desperation and perfume. I laughed, imagining Karen stamping them herself. I kept them in a small box labeled, evidence of crazy, just in case. One evening, I decided to confront her directly. I walked to her house, smiling warmly, holding a small basket of fresh tomatoes. Hi, Karen. I thought maybe we could talk about the gate. She opened the door and immediately scowled. I don't want anything from you. I shrugged. I know. I just wanted to see if we could find a friendly solution. Her face twisted. Solution? There is no solution. You've upset the entire HOA. I nodded. I understand that. But honestly, it's not about upsetting anyone. It's about respecting property lines. And my yard has been crossed without my permission too many times. She leaned closer, pointing an accusing finger. You think you can own us all? That gate won't stop the HOA. I smiled softly. It's not about stopping anyone. It's about boundaries, Karen. And respecting them. She slammed the door shut. That night, I heard a strange noise outside. My dog, Buster, barked furiously. I looked out the window and saw a shadow moving near the gate. Someone was trying to pick the lock. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. While I spoke with the operator, the shadow froze. Then, with a loud crash, it ran away. I ran outside, heart pounding, but found nothing except for a small piece of torn floral fabric snagged on the fence. I recognized it immediately. Karen's signature blouse. The next day, I called a locksmith and had the gate reinforced. Now it wasn't just steel. It had double locks and a tamper alarm. I also posted a polite sign. Private property trespassers will be recorded and prosecuted. Karen didn't give up. She started gathering allies. The next HOA meeting was chaotic. I attended, standing at the back, quietly watching as she rallied neighbors to her cause. Everyone, the homeowner is being selfish, blocking the only entrance to our community, she declared. Some neighbors murmured, agreement. Others rolled their eyes. A few whispered to each other. She's lost it. I waited patiently for my turn. When she paused, I raised my hand. Actually, I said, the entrance isn't public property. It's part of my yard, as confirmed by the county records. I'm happy to give permission if someone needs access, but it's my property, not the HOA's. A hush fell over the room. Papers shuffled. Karen's face turned redder than a ripe tomato, ironic, considering the ones I had once offered her. You're lying, she shouted. I held up my phone with the official property maps on display. You're mistaken. The records are public. The room erupted into whispers. Some neighbors looked shocked, others smiled. Karen, however, looked like a caged tiger. That night, the tension escalated. I returned home to find that someone had spray painted on my driveway. Gate or war. I felt my stomach drop. My peaceful neighborhood now had a sign of hostility painted in bright red letters on my property. My first instinct was anger, but then I took a deep breath. I had spent months learning patience, practicing kindness, and trying to avoid conflict. I grabbed a hose and washed the message away, muttering, kindness always wins, always. Still, I knew this wasn't over. The spray paint was a warning, a signal that Karen was now willing to escalate her efforts. The next extreme event came suddenly. It was a Saturday morning. Birds were chirping. Sunlight streamed through the trees. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. I squinted and saw a small construction crew at the gate. Dump trucks, cement mixers, and orange cones were set up like they were building a highway, all aimed at my property. Karen stood there, clipboard in hand, shouting instructions. She looked triumphant. We're opening access. This gate is illegal. I dropped my coffee. My heart raced. The gate, my hard-earned defense, was about to be destroyed in front of me. I ran outside, waving my hands. Stop. This is private property. You cannot do this. The crew hesitated, looking confused. Karen yelled louder. Ignore him. He has no authority here. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 again. This was no longer just a battle of wills. It was trespassing in full force, with construction equipment ready to tear down my property. And in that moment, as the cement mixer revved and Karen's shouts echoed across the neighborhood, I realized something. This gate wasn't just a barrier. It was a symbol of boundaries, of respect, of standing up for yourself when others refused to understand. The extreme moment had arrived. Karen's full assault on my property was underway, and all I could do was wait and prepare. The scene outside my yard that morning looked like a full-blown war zone. Dump trucks, cement mixers, and orange cones blocked the street leading to my gate. Karen, clipboard in hand, was barking orders to the crew like a general commanding an army. Her sunglasses reflected the sun, making her glare seem even more intense. My heart was racing, but I knew panic wouldn't help. I needed a plan. I ran back inside, grabbing the property deed and county records from my desk. My hands shook, but I forced myself to stay calm. I dialed 911 and explained the situation again. Yes, there is heavy machinery on my private property. Yes, they're attempting to destroy a gate I legally own. Yes, the HOA president is directing it. While I waited for the police, I watched through the window. Karen stomped closer to the gate, pointing at the crew. Dig here, break it down. One worker hesitated. Ma'am, isn't this private property? Karen waved him off. Just do your job. I felt a surge of disbelief. She literally thought she could bulldoze my yard because she didn't like a gate. I took a deep breath, reminded myself of the principle that kindness and patience often yield more power than anger, and stepped onto the porch. Karen, I called, my voice steady. You are on my property. Leave immediately, or I will have no choice but to involve the authorities. Her expression twisted into a scowl. You can't stop us. The HOA owns this neighborhood. I smiled softly, even though my chest felt tight. Actually, the records say otherwise. I own this property, including the land under the gate. You've been trespassing here for months. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then she yelled, "Liar," and waved her arms. By that time, a police car pulled into the cul-de-sac. The officer stepped out, surveying the scene with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Karen immediately ran to him, pointing at me. "Officer, this homeowner is blocking access to the entire community. He's..." I held up my deed and property maps. "Officer, this is my land. I have records to prove it. They cannot legally build on my property without my permission." The officer squinted, studying the papers. Karen's face went from red to pale. For the first time, she didn't have an argument. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, are you aware this is private property?" Karen sputtered but could only shake her head. The workers looked between us nervously. Without saying another word, they backed away, muttering about paperwork and liability. The dump trucks revved and rolled back down the street. I felt my shoulders release tension I didn't know I was holding. My gate was safe. My yard was mine. I couldn't help but smile. But Karen wasn't finished. Oh no. She had just realized she couldn't win with brute force. She was going to escalate differently, emotionally, socially, politically. That afternoon, I decided to reach out to neighbors. I went door to door, explaining the situation calmly, offering cookies, and sharing my perspective. I wanted to make sure they understood that this wasn't about being difficult. It was about respect, kindness, and protecting one's own space without harming anyone else. Most neighbors were supportive, nodding and offering words of encouragement. One elderly woman, Mrs. Patel, said quietly, "It takes a lot of courage to stand up to someone like her. You did the right thing." Even Jim, the neighbor who had warned me about Karen's obsession, clapped me on the back. Finally, someone drew a line. "I've seen what she does to people. And this is how you stop it." Her allies in the HOA started to lose steam once they realized the police wouldn't back up Karen's illegal actions. She tried sending another wave of letters threatening legal action, but the letters now seemed desperate rather than intimidating. Still, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Karen's determination had shifted into something more subtle but no less dangerous: psychological warfare. I noticed small things happening around my yard. The security camera captured her standing outside the gate at odd hours, muttering into her phone. My mailbox was rifled through, though nothing was stolen, just displaced. Someone, I suspected her, had even left a small, broken garden gnome on my front steps. I reminded myself, kindness is a stronger shield than rage. Each time I found a mess, I cleaned it up with a smile. I watered my plants, I swept my porch, and I even left fresh flowers outside my gate in a small vase. It confused her. My patience and civility made her look irrational. In her eyes, a proper reaction to someone who defends their property would be fear, not smiles and flowers. One morning, Buster, my dog, started barking incessantly. I looked outside and saw Karen standing across the street, holding a megaphone like she was about to address the entire neighborhood. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that reacting with anger would only escalate things. I stepped outside calmly. "Karen, this is my property. You may not broadcast threats or harass me from here." She stared at me, blinking in disbelief. You're not afraid of me?" "No," I said simply. "I'm not afraid of anyone who disrespects boundaries. But I am willing to show kindness and patience. That's my choice." Her face twisted, unable to reconcile my calm with her own rage. She stomped off, muttering under her breath. The extreme event of this chapter, however, came unexpectedly. Late that night, around 11 p.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of chainsaws. My heart froze. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. Through the shadows, I saw a figure moving quickly near the trees lining my property. Karen, wielding a chainsaw? No, impossible, I thought. But there she was, trying to cut a tree limb that leaned slightly over the gate, hoping it would damage it or intimidate me. The chainsaw roared to life. Sparks flew. Buster barked furiously, racing around her, but not close enough to stop her. I yelled, "Stop, police!" The chainsaw stopped abruptly. Karen froze, the saw idling in her hands. The police, who had been patrolling the area after previous complaints, arrived in minutes. They arrested her on the spot for attempted property damage and trespassing. I stood there, shaking. The adrenaline coursed through me. For months, she had harassed, trespassed, and intimidated me. And now, justice was finally catching up. Yet even with her temporarily removed from the equation, I knew the HOA battle wasn't over. Karen's allies could still try to challenge me, or worse, find loopholes to continue the harassment. I had won this battle, but the war for peace, boundaries, and respect in my neighborhood was far from over. The morning after Karen was taken into custody, the neighborhood felt strangely quiet. The tension that had been constant for months seemed to lift, replaced with an almost eerie calm. I walked around my yard, inspecting the gate, the trees, and the flower beds. Everything was intact, untouched, except for a few branches that had been carelessly tossed aside during the chainsaw incident. I sighed with relief. Finally, some peace. But peace, as I had learned over the last few months, was temporary when Karen was involved. I spent the day fixing minor damage near the gate and pruning the trees properly to prevent another chainsaw incident. I also upgraded the security system, adding more cameras with night vision and motion sensors. I wanted to make sure that no one, Karen or otherwise, could ever challenge the boundary I had worked so hard to establish. While I was working, neighbors cautiously approached. Mrs. Patel walked over, carrying a basket of muffins. "I thought you might like a little breakfast," she said softly. "You've been under so much stress." I smiled, feeling warmth spread in my chest. The kindness of some neighbors reminded me why I had chosen this neighborhood in the first place. Jim leaned against the fence, shaking his head. "You handled her better than anyone else I've ever seen. Most people would have exploded months ago." I shrugged. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Anger never solved anything. But standing firm, calmly, that's a different story. Later that afternoon, I received a call from the HOA board. Their voice was strained and polite. Very different from Karen's usual bluster. "We'd like to discuss the situation regarding your gate and the recent events," they said. I agreed to a meeting but set clear boundaries. It had to be at my home, outside, with social distancing and no interference from Karen, who was still technically under investigation. When they arrived, it was awkward at first. The board members fidgeted nervously as I offered lemonade and showed them the gate. I explained the property lines, the deed, and why their previous attempts to access the community through my yard were illegal. One board member, Mrs. Thompson, spoke up. We didn't realize the entrance was privately owned. We've always just assumed it was public property." I nodded. Assumptions can be dangerous. It cost me months of stress. And it could have cost someone legal trouble if I hadn't acted. Another board member, Mr. Fields, added, "We appreciate how calmly you handled this. It's impressive." I smiled politely. "Thank you. But more than anything, I hope it serves as a reminder that kindness, patience, and clear communication are more effective than force or intimidation." Karen, of course, was not done, even from the confines of her temporary legal restrictions. I received several passive-aggressive emails from her account. Some were threats disguised as polite notes, others were attempts to sway neighbors to her side. One email read, "Your actions are causing unnecessary conflict in the community. You should reconsider the gate for the greater good of the neighborhood." I didn't reply. I knew that engaging would only feed her need for control. Instead, I printed each email and filed it neatly in a folder labeled "Evidence of HOA Misconduct." That evening, I noticed a group of kids playing near the street outside the gate. One of them accidentally kicked a ball toward the property line, and I caught it, tossing it back with a smile. Their parents waved politely. That moment reminded me why I was protecting this space. It wasn't just about me. It was about creating a safe environment for everyone. The extreme event of this chapter arrived unexpectedly on a Thursday night. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. The front door light flickered, casting shadows across the yard. Outside, a dark figure lurked near my gate, carrying what looked like a crowbar. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately. The operator stayed on the line, instructing me to remain inside and avoid confrontation. I watched as the figure tried to pry open the gate. The locks held firm, thankfully, but the sound of metal scraping against metal made my stomach churn. Then, just as quickly as it started, the figure fled, disappearing into the darkness. The police arrived minutes later and patrolled the neighborhood, but there was no sign of the intruder. The security cameras recorded the entire incident, capturing a blurry image that I could only assume was Karen or someone acting on her behalf. The next morning, I made a decision. I reinforced the gate further with a secondary lock system and installed a small alarm that would sound loudly if anyone tried to tamper with it again. I also sent an email to all neighbors, politely explaining what had happened and reminding them that the gate was private property and any unauthorized access would be treated as trespassing. Some neighbors responded with supportive messages, others with curiosity about how I had handled the situation. The community slowly began to understand that this was more than just a feud with Karen. It was a lesson in boundaries, respect, and the power of remaining calm under pressure. During the following week, I noticed small changes. Karen's presence in the neighborhood had decreased. The emails stopped, and her usual late-night appearances near the gate ceased. The HOA seemed more cautious around me, and while some board members still whispered behind closed doors, none dared confront me directly. I also spent more time outside, tending my garden and enjoying the fresh air. Buster ran around the yard happily, free from the constant tension that had plagued us for months. The flowers were blooming, the vegetables thriving, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without anxiety. But even in the calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over. Karen had proven before that she was unpredictable, relentless, and capable of extreme actions. I knew that one day, she might find another way to try to challenge me. And when that day came, I had to be ready, mentally, legally, and emotionally. That night, as I sat on the porch reflecting on everything that had happened, I thought about the lessons I had learned. Patience and kindness had not only protected me but had also shown the community that standing up for your rights didn't require anger or aggression. Clear boundaries, communication, and empathy were powerful tools that Karen had underestimated. Then, just as I was about to go inside, I noticed something moving near the edge of the property. At first, I thought it was a raccoon, or perhaps a stray cat. But the shape seemed too deliberate, too human. My heart raced again. Before I could react, the shadow disappeared into the night, leaving only a small envelope on the ground near the gate. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was addressed to me in large, block letters. "This isn't over." A chill ran down my spine. Karen had found a new way to escalate her obsession. And in that moment, I realized the battle for peace, respect, and boundaries in my neighborhood was far from finished. The envelope lay in my hands like a warning carved into paper. I turned it over slowly, hesitant to open it. But curiosity and the need to understand Karen's next move overpowered caution. Inside was a single piece of thick cardstock with jagged handwriting in red ink. "You can't keep us out forever. Watch carefully." No signature, no return address. Just those words, like a dark shadow of a threat. I shivered but reminded myself to stay calm. For months, I had learned that Karen thrived on fear, on reactions. Panic would only give her more fuel. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and immediately called the police to report the threat. They noted it in my file and promised to increase neighborhood patrols. I also checked the security cameras. Nothing unusual appeared during the night, no vehicles, no figures in the yard. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. I felt my nerves taut, but I reminded myself to focus on what I could control: my property, my safety, and my reactions. The next morning, I decided to inspect the perimeter of the yard more thoroughly. I wanted to make sure there were no hidden vulnerabilities. I walked along the fence line, pruning overgrown bushes, checking the locks, and inspecting the reinforced gate. Everything was solid, but I decided to add motion sensor lights along the sides. A small investment, but one that would make any late-night trespasser visible. Buster followed me loyally, sniffing every corner and growling softly at any rustling in the bushes. I patted his head. "Don't worry, buddy. We're safe, and we'll keep it that way." Neighbors began to notice my increased vigilance. Some waved from their windows, others walked by offering words of encouragement. Their support was comforting. After months of conflict with Karen, it felt good to see that not everyone was intimidated by her antics. By midweek, the quiet tension in the neighborhood had shifted, Karen, despite her absence from direct contact, was clearly trying to influence others. I started hearing from neighbors that she had been making calls, sending emails, and showing up at other HOA meetings trying to rally support for her cause. Some of her allies approached me cautiously, trying to argue that the gate was unfair. I listened, patiently, calmly, explaining that the gate wasn't about being unfair, it was about legal boundaries, personal property, and respect. Most of them eventually nodded, realizing that their arguments didn't hold. Kindness and clarity were more persuasive than confrontation. By the end of the week, the HOA board members seemed reluctant to push further. Karen's tactics, once intimidating, were losing effectiveness. Despite the apparent calm, the shadow of the threat lingered. That Thursday night, Buster began barking aggressively around 11 p.m. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the gate. Nothing moved, nothing appeared in the yard. But when I looked at the ground near the edge of the property, I saw something small and metallic glinting in the moonlight. It was a lockpick set, left deliberately near the gate, as if to say, "Try it, if you dare." I took a deep breath and put it inside a small evidence bag. I knew immediately who it belonged to. There was no one else obsessed with bypassing my gate like Karen. I called the police again, explaining that it was likely an escalation from the previous threats. They promised to investigate further and suggested I remain vigilant. That night, I installed an additional layer of protection, a silent alarm that would send alerts directly to my phone whenever someone tampered with the gate. The next day, I received a curious email from one of my more reasonable neighbors, Lisa. She wrote, "I just want to say, you've handled this situation with more patience than anyone else could. I don't agree with Karen, and I hope the neighborhood can see that your gate is protecting all of us too." I replied, thanking her for the kind words. It was a reminder that standing up for your rights while maintaining empathy could inspire others. Kindness wasn't just a moral choice, it was strategic. That evening, I decided to spend some time in the yard, enjoying the cool breeze and the sound of crickets. Buster lay lazily under a tree while I checked on the garden. It was therapeutic, a stark contrast to the stress of the past months. I reflected on how much I had learned about patience, empathy, and human nature. Karen's relentless aggression had taught me the value of calm, persistence, and the importance of setting clear boundaries. But peace is often temporary when someone like Karen is involved. Around 10:45 p.m., I noticed movement on the security cameras, a figure approaching the gate. My heart skipped a beat. The streetlights illuminated the outline of a person carrying a small bag. I recognized the figure immediately. It was Karen. She had returned. I froze for a moment, assessing the situation. The gate's locks were secure, the alarm system was active, and the police had been notified in advance that night. I wasn't going to react with fear, but I needed to document everything. Karen circled the gate, checking for weak points. She muttered to herself, probably trying to figure out a way to bypass the reinforced locks. Then she pulled out a small crowbar and tested the hinges, prying slightly. The gate held firm. The alarm remained silent for the moment, a testament to my careful installation. Suddenly, Karen pulled out her phone and started filming the gate, narrating in an exaggerated tone for her video. "The homeowner is blocking the community. This is illegal. Watch as I document their tyranny." I sighed, shaking my head. Her obsession wasn't just about access anymore, it was about attention. She thrived on creating chaos and trying to make herself look like a victim. I stayed calm, recording my own video from a safe distance inside the yard, documenting her actions. This would be essential evidence if she escalated further. Then the extreme event occurred. Karen, frustrated by her inability to break the gate, slammed the crowbar against the steel with a forceful clang. Sparks flew, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Buster barked furiously, running in circles. Karen's hand trembled with rage as she tried again, hitting the gate repeatedly. The noise woke a few neighbors, who called the police once more. Within minutes, patrol cars arrived, sirens quieting her fury. Karen froze, caught in the act once again. She couldn't claim ignorance this time. Attempted property damage, harassment, and trespassing were all documented. As the police escorted her away, I realized something important. My patience, my calm, and my steadfastness had not only protected my property but had also proven to the neighborhood and the authorities that Karen's behavior was unacceptable. The gate was more than a physical barrier, it had become a symbol of standing up for yourself without resorting to aggression. Even in the chaos, I smiled. I had turned the extreme behavior of another person into an opportunity to reinforce my values: kindness, empathy, and respect, combined with firm boundaries. The night ended quietly. I walked around my yard one last time, checking the locks and ensuring the cameras were recording. Buster wagged his tail, sensing that the immediate danger had passed, at least for now. I knew Karen might find another way to challenge me, but I felt prepared. I had the tools, the support, and the knowledge to protect my space without compromising my principles. And yet, even as I locked the gate for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's obsession wasn't fully extinguished. She had proven before that she could escalate unpredictably. I knew the next chapter of this story could arrive at any time, unannounced, testing my patience and resolve once more. The morning after Karen's failed attempt with the crowbar, I felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Relief, because my gate and yard were still intact. Tension, because I knew Karen's obsession wasn't gone, it had simply changed form. She was clever, unpredictable, and relentless. I had learned over the past months that her methods could be subtle, psychological, or even manipulative, rather than just physical attacks. I spent the morning reviewing the footage from my security cameras, analyzing every frame of her previous attempts. Each one revealed her meticulous approach. She noted weak points, studied patterns, and tested boundaries. I realized I needed to be proactive, not reactive. I decided to take additional precautions. I hired a professional security consultant to evaluate the property and the gate. They recommended motion-activated floodlights, reinforced hinges, and an automated alert system that would notify me and the police instantly if anyone tampered with the gate. The installation took 2 days, but the end result made the property almost impenetrable. Neighbors stopped by to compliment the improvements. Mrs. Patel handed me a small potted plant saying, "For your resilience and patience. You've shown that firmness and kindness can coexist." I smiled warmly. Her words reminded me why I had chosen to approach this situation with patience rather than anger. Even Jim, my longtime neighbor, nodded approvingly. Most people would have gone to court by now, or fought her with aggression. You've handled this with style. Despite the improvements, Karen didn't disappear. That week, I started receiving strange packages on my porch. At first, they were harmless: catalogs, flyers, and one box of mismatched screws. But soon, the packages became more pointed. A broken padlock, a small piece of her floral clothing, and one night, a note folded carefully inside a book she had somehow left at my doorstep. The note read, "You may win now, but every victory is temporary. Watch carefully. I will find a way." I filed the note with the others in my evidence folder. I refused to react emotionally. The stakes were high, yes, but my goal was to protect my property and maintain control without letting her provoke me. By midweek, the neighborhood began murmuring about Karen's strange behavior. Some neighbors whispered to me, confirming that she had been seen speaking aggressively at other HOA meetings, trying to sway opinions and rally support. I decided to approach the HOA cautiously, requesting a formal discussion about her conduct, which had now escalated to harassment and attempted property damage. During the meeting, I calmly presented my evidence: video footage, security reports, the threatening envelope, and the repeated attempts at gate interference. The board members could no longer ignore the reality. Karen's behavior wasn't just a personality clash. It was illegal, dangerous, and disruptive. One board member, Mrs. Thompson, finally said, We underestimated how serious this situation had become. This goes beyond rules or property aesthetics." I nodded, maintaining a calm and steady demeanor. "Exactly. This is about respect, boundaries, and personal safety. The gate is a physical representation of those boundaries. My hope is that everyone can see it as such." That evening, I spent time outside in the yard, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The garden was thriving, the flowers bloomed brightly, and Buster chased shadows playfully. For a few hours, the chaos of the past months faded. I reflected on the lessons this ordeal had taught me. Patience is strength, empathy is power, and calm perseverance can neutralize aggression more effectively than retaliation. But then the extreme event of the chapter arrived, shattering the brief calm. It was around 11:15 p.m., when the motion sensor lights suddenly illuminated the yard. I froze, my stomach knotting. Through the security camera feed, I saw Karen standing outside the gate, holding a small ladder. Her plan was obvious: scale the gate, bypassing the locks and alarms. She had shifted from brute force to cunning tactics. I immediately called 911. While speaking to the dispatcher, I grabbed my flashlight and stayed near a safe vantage point inside the house. Karen began to climb the ladder, her sunglasses reflecting the bright security lights. I could hear the faint click of her shoes on metal. My heart raced, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Fear was exactly what she wanted. Before she could reach the top, the alarm system activated. A loud, piercing siren erupted, startling her and drawing attention from neighbors. The siren triggered a camera notification to my phone, and I saw her stumble, losing her balance. Buster barked furiously, running along the fence in protective circles. The police arrived within minutes. Karen froze, realizing she had been caught yet again. She couldn't argue her way out this time. Attempted trespassing, harassment, and endangering herself and others were now clearly documented. The officers escorted her away while I recorded the event for evidence. The next morning, I walked around the yard, inspecting the gate and surrounding areas. Everything remained intact, but the adrenaline from the night before lingered. I realized that Karen's escalation had reached a dangerous level. The physical threats, combined with the psychological pressure, showed that this was more than a property dispute. It had become an obsession. I decided to implement an additional layer of protection, a secondary barrier behind the main gate. A reinforced fence section, hidden cameras, and an audible alert system ensured that even if she attempted another ladder approach, it would be nearly impossible for her to succeed. Over the next few days, I took the opportunity to educate neighbors. I held a small, informal gathering in my yard, sharing the lessons I had learned about boundaries, property rights, and the power of responding with calm assertiveness rather than anger. People listened attentively, asking questions about the gate, the security measures, and my approach to Karen's harassment. I emphasized the importance of empathy, patience, and clear communication. Kindness is not weakness, I said. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. You can protect yourself and your property while still treating others with respect. That balance is the most powerful tool you have. Several neighbors nodded. Some even admitted that Karen's behavior had made them afraid to confront similar issues in their own yards. My example, they said, had inspired confidence. That night, as I settled into bed, I reflected on the journey so far. Months of harassment, trespassing, and threats had taught me valuable lessons about resilience, strategy, and self-respect. The gate was more than steel and locks. It was a symbol of standing firm without resorting to fear or aggression. But even as I lay there, I felt a flicker of unease. Karen's obsession had proven before that she would not give up, even when faced with legal consequences and clear boundaries. I knew that eventually, she might find another way to test me mentally, emotionally, or physically. And when that moment came, I would need to remain vigilant, empathetic, and strategically calm. The battle for peace, respect, and control of my property was far from over. The weeks following Karen's failed ladder attempt were a strange mix of calm and tension. On the surface, the neighborhood seemed peaceful. Birds chirped in the morning, the sun highlighted the freshly pruned flower beds, and Buster chased shadows along the fence with glee. Yet, beneath that calm, I felt a simmering awareness. Karen had not disappeared. Her obsession had shifted, and I had to remain vigilant. I spent those days reinforcing my property lines, reviewing security footage, and communicating with the police. I also spent time observing the neighborhood dynamics. Some neighbors quietly expressed admiration for my patience and fortitude, while others whispered their concerns about Karen's persistence. Everyone seemed to realize that this situation had evolved beyond a simple HOA disagreement. It was now a psychological game, a battle of persistence versus obsession. One afternoon, I noticed small changes near the gate. A few stray rocks had been strategically placed along the driveway. The hose had been moved slightly. A small note was tucked under the doormat. I recognized Karen's handwriting immediately, jagged, erratic, and oddly obsessive. It read, "You can't keep us out forever. One way or another, the gate will come down." I felt a chill, but reminded myself that fear was exactly what she wanted. I photographed the note and added it to my growing evidence folder. Then, I carefully put it away, telling myself that remaining calm and methodical was my strongest defense. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the yard, checking the security measures once again. The floodlights were operational, the cameras covered every angle, and the reinforced locks were intact. I added one more measure, a thin but nearly invisible cable along the top of the gate that would trigger the alarm if anyone tried to climb over. Buster followed me closely, growling softly at the occasional rustle in the bushes. He had been my loyal protector through all this, a constant reminder that vigilance was key. But so was patience. By midweek, Karen's harassment began shifting to subtler forms. I started receiving anonymous complaints filed with the HOA, claiming that my gate was an eyesore and that I was being unneighborly. The board had begun to take notice, likely because of Karen's influence, but my calm and evidence-backed approach made it difficult for them to act against me. I responded politely to every inquiry, attaching documentation about property ownership, security measures, and prior incidents. I kept my tone professional and empathetic, emphasizing that the gate wasn't about creating conflict, it was about boundaries and respect. Interestingly, some neighbors began to see Karen for what she really was. They mentioned overhearing her dramatic monologues about rights being stolen and her constant attempts to manipulate board members. The support from the community grew quietly but steadily. Then came the extreme event that changed the dynamic yet again. One night, around 11 p.m., I was in the kitchen, reviewing footage from the security cameras, when a shadow crossed the yard. The motion sensors triggered the floodlights instantly, illuminating Karen standing outside the gate, holding a spray paint can. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was escalation to vandalism. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, reporting an ongoing attempt to damage property. Through the security feed, I watched in disbelief as Karen began spraying the words, "Gate will fall," on the side of my reinforced steel gate. Buster barked furiously, running in circles to warn me, and to create a distraction. Karen's movements were fast but sloppy, and the bright floodlights reflected in her sunglasses, making her hesitate as she realized she was being recorded. By the time the police arrived, she had finished only half the message. She froze as the patrol car's headlights bathed her in light. The officers approached cautiously. "Ma'am, step away from the property," one commanded. Karen sputtered, trying to argue that she was exercising her right to protest, but the officers had all the evidence from the cameras and my prior reports. The following morning I inspected the gate. The spray paint could be cleaned, but the psychological message was clear. Karen's obsession had not faded. The notes, the packages, the vandalism, it was all a pattern. Yet, I realized something important. Her attempts were predictable, and every act she took could now be documented and countered legally. I cleaned the gate carefully, wearing gloves and using gentle solvents to remove the paint without damaging the reinforced steel. While I worked, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. Patience, strategic planning, and empathy were more powerful than aggression. Even in the face of harassment, maintaining control of one's emotions was a form of victory. Later that week, I began to take small steps to reclaim the narrative. I spoke to a few neighbors privately, showing them the evidence and explaining Karen's escalation patterns. I emphasized that the gate wasn't a symbol of selfishness but of safety and respect. Their response was overwhelmingly supportive. Even a few of Karen's quieter allies began to understand that her obsession was harming the community more than the gate ever could. The neighborhood's perspective was shifting subtly but decisively. Karen was becoming isolated, and her tactics were losing effectiveness. Despite the growing support, I remained vigilant. I installed a secondary alarm system with direct notification to my phone and the local police. Any tampering, even minimal, would trigger an immediate response. I also reinforced the fence line near the trees, making it nearly impossible to access the yard without triggering the security systems. Buster, ever watchful, patrolled the yard with me, his presence both comforting and reassuring. I realized that this ordeal had not only strengthened my boundaries physically but also mentally. I was more patient, more strategic, and more empathetic toward others while still standing firm. The extreme event for the chapter arrived unexpectedly one Sunday morning. I was enjoying coffee on the porch when I noticed a delivery truck parked oddly near the entrance to the cul-de-sac. At first I thought it was a routine package delivery, but then I recognized the figure emerging from the truck, Karen, carrying a ladder, tools, and what looked like a can of industrial adhesive. My heart sank. She had returned, determined to find a new method to bypass the gate. I immediately called the police and stayed inside, observing from a safe distance. Karen moved with purpose, attempting to attach the ladder to a side wall to scale the reinforced gate. Buster barked furiously, circling the yard, while I watched the security feed, documenting every motion. Before she could act, the police arrived, lights flashing. Karen froze, realizing she had been caught yet again. Her frustration was palpable, but there was nothing she could do. Attempted trespassing, harassment, and prior property damage charges now added weight to her escalating legal troubles. I felt a surge of relief but reminded myself that the battle was far from over. Karen's obsession was still alive, even if her ability to act had been constrained by law enforcement and security measures. I had learned that patience, preparation, and empathy were my strongest allies, but vigilance remained essential. I walked the yard, inspecting the gate, fences, and security systems once more. Buster followed closely, as loyal as ever. The neighborhood was quiet again, the sun beginning to rise over freshly trimmed flower beds. For now, peace had returned, but I knew from experience that Karen's next move could come without warning. Even in the midst of extreme harassment, I realized the gate symbolized more than protection. It was a testament to patience, resilience, and the balance between kindness and firmness. And as I watched the sunrise, I felt ready for whatever came next. The days following Karen's latest failed attempt to scale the gate were eerily quiet. The neighborhood seemed to exhale collectively, as if holding its breath had finally ended. I spent the mornings walking through my yard, checking the security cameras, and inspecting the reinforced gate and fence. Everything was solid. Yet, a subtle tension lingered in the air, a reminder that Karen's obsession was not gone, merely delayed. I focused on maintaining a routine. Each morning, I watered the flowers, pruned the rose bushes, and tended the vegetable patch. Buster accompanied me, wagging his tail and occasionally stopping to sniff the perimeter of the yard. I realized these small acts of care were as much about my mental peace as they were about the garden. Maintaining control over my property meant more than locks and cameras. It meant claiming the space for life, growth, and positivity despite ongoing threats. By midweek, the HOA began to realize that Karen's escalating antics were harming the community more than any gate could. Several board members approached me privately, expressing concern over her behavior. They were tentative at first, still hesitant to fully confront her, but their tone had shifted. One of them, Mrs. Thompson, admitted quietly, "We underestimated how serious things had become. Your patience has shown us that there's a better way to handle disputes without letting emotions take control." I smiled, nodding. It's not about winning or losing. It's about respecting boundaries and protecting one's own space while still showing empathy to others. That's a principle that works in any community. Her eyes widened slightly. "You've handled this remarkably. Most people would have lost their temper long ago." I shrugged. The goal isn't to react to aggression, but to manage it strategically. Anger only fuels more chaos. Calm persistence wins over time. Despite the HOA's cautious support, Karen continued to escalate her psychological attacks. I began noticing more subtle signs of her presence. A branch was bent unusually near the gate one morning. A small rock was placed deliberately on the walkway, and the faint scent of her perfume lingered near the perimeter. Each act was minor, almost imperceptible, but it was clear she was testing the limits of my vigilance. I reminded myself not to overreact. Each subtle intrusion was an opportunity to reinforce boundaries without engaging in confrontation. I documented every detail, photographing and recording the incidents, building an organized archive of evidence. My approach was methodical. I didn't just protect my property physically, I fortified it legally and psychologically. One afternoon, I took the opportunity to speak directly with a few neighbors who had remained neutral throughout the ordeal. I wanted them to understand that my gate wasn't about selfishness or control, but about personal safety and community respect. I invited them to see the security setup, the reinforced locks, and the motion sensors. Their reactions were overwhelmingly positive. I had no idea how much she had been escalating, one neighbor admitted. I thought it was just a disagreement over aesthetics, but seeing this, I understand why you acted as you did. Even Jim, who had initially been wary of confrontation, nodded in approval. You've handled this with incredible patience. You've protected your property and taught the neighborhood something important about standing firm without aggression. Despite this growing support, I remained vigilant. One night, around 11:30 p.m., the extreme event for this chapter unfolded. The motion sensor lights activated, illuminating the yard in a bright, almost blinding glare. From the security feed, I saw Karen approaching, carrying a backpack and what appeared to be spray paint cans and various tools. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a subtle intrusion, it was an outright attempt to damage property and intimidate me once again. I immediately dialed 911 and stayed inside, observing from a safe vantage point. Karen moved toward the gate cautiously, clearly aware of the floodlights and camera coverage. but her determination was palpable. She tried to pry the secondary locks, spray paint the gate, and even test the reinforced hinges. Buster barked furiously, running along the fence and warning me of her every move. The siren from the security system had not yet been triggered, but I knew it would activate with the slightest interference. Suddenly, Karen's backpack slipped, spilling tools across the driveway. She cursed under her breath, bending to pick them up. That momentary distraction caused her to trip over a garden hose I had left for irrigation purposes. She fell hard, scraping her knees and dropping a spray can. The police, alerted immediately by the motion sensor, arrived within minutes. The bright lights of their patrol cars caught Karen off guard. She froze, realizing she had been recorded committing multiple acts of trespassing and attempted vandalism. The officers approached cautiously, noting the scattered tools and her behavior. She tried to claim she was checking the gate for safety, but the evidence was overwhelming. The aftermath of the incident was both relief and reflection. I walked through the yard, inspecting the gate and fence. Minor scratches were present, but nothing significant. The psychological toll of her repeated attempts, however, was another matter. I felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. Karen's obsession had reached a dangerous level, but I had prepared meticulously and remained calm, turning potential fear into a controlled and safe environment. I also realized that my approach had strengthened my relationship with the community. Neighbors had witnessed my restraint, my organization, and my clear documentation of each escalation. The HOA began taking Karen's actions more seriously, understanding that her behavior went beyond minor disagreements. Over the next few days, I focused on reinforcing the lessons I had learned. I documented every small intrusion, every suspicious note, and every tool left on my property. I updated the security system, double-checking that the alarm alerts were functioning correctly and that backup notifications were in place. I also took time to reflect on kindness and empathy. Each act of harassment from Karen had tested my patience, yet responding with anger would have played into her strategy. Remaining calm and methodical allowed me to maintain control and set a positive example for the neighborhood. I realized that this balance of firmness and empathy was a skill that extended beyond property disputes. It was a life principle. Then, late one night, as I sat on the porch sipping tea and reflecting, Buster growled softly. I glanced at the security monitor and saw a faint shadow moving near the edge of the yard. My heart raced. Even after the last extreme event, Karen was persistent. I reached for my phone to call the police, but then I noticed something unusual. It wasn't Karen this time. It was a neighbor, peering cautiously over the fence, trying to alert me that Karen had been spotted further down the street, carrying a ladder and another set of tools. I took a deep breath, realizing that the next escalation could come at any moment. The gate, while physically secure, had become a symbol of persistence, vigilance, and the power of responding with calm and strategy. And as I watched the shadow disappear into the night, I knew that the final chapters of this struggle were still ahead, testing my patience, resolve, and empathy in ways I hadn't yet imagined. By the time Chapter 9 began, I had learned that peace in my neighborhood was fragile. After months of harassment, trespassing, and increasingly bold attempts by Karen to breach my property, I understood that vigilance had to be constant. The gate was more than metal and locks, it was a boundary, a symbol of patience, and a testament to the power of calm persistence. The morning started like any other. I watered the flower beds, trimmed the shrubs, and checked the security cameras. Buster was beside me, running around happily, sniffing every corner of the yard. There was a quiet satisfaction in these routines. They reminded me that, despite Karen's obsession, life could still move forward with care, responsibility, and mindfulness. I had also taken proactive steps to ensure the neighborhood understood my perspective. A few neighbors had come over to see the gate, the security cameras, and the reinforced fences. I explained why the gate wasn't a symbol of selfishness but a necessary boundary. Their reactions were encouraging. Some admitted that they had been intimidated by Karen in the past, and my approach had given them confidence to maintain their own boundaries. Even HOA members, previously hesitant to confront Karen, had begun to understand the severity of the situation. Mrs. Thompson, one of the more cautious board members, admitted privately, "You've taught us that patience and documentation can prevent escalation. Most people wouldn't have stayed calm this long." I nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement. The key lesson was that firmness and empathy could coexist, a principle I had been following carefully throughout the ordeal. Despite the apparent calm, I knew Karen was still lurking. The subtle signs of her presence were now almost daily. Misplaced garden tools, small notes slipped under the gate, and occasional unfamiliar footprints near the fence. Each act, though minor, served as a psychological reminder that she had not yet given up. I documented every incident meticulously, photographing notes, footprints, and evidence of tampering. I shared the information with the police regularly, ensuring there was a clear record of escalation. Each small act, when combined, painted a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and obsession. Then came the less extreme event that marked the midpoint of the chapter. One evening, I noticed a series of colored chalk marks on the sidewalk near the entrance to my property. At first I assumed they were from neighborhood kids, but the shapes were deliberate, arrows pointing toward my gate with small, menacing symbols. I immediately called a neighbor, who confirmed that Karen had been seen walking along that route earlier that day, carrying a small chalk kit. It was subtle, but clearly an intimidation tactic. I cleaned the chalk marks while documenting them, reflecting on the way Karen escalated in increasingly manipulative ways. That night, I reinforced the perimeter with temporary markers, small motion sensors hidden among the bushes, and set my camera alerts to high sensitivity. I knew Karen might return, and I wanted to be prepared. The neighborhood itself began reacting differently. Several neighbors started keeping watch discreetly, knowing that Karen's obsession could affect the whole street. Some approached me with words of support, others with curiosity, asking how I had managed to handle months of harassment without reacting angrily. I shared the lessons I had learned: patience, strategic calmness, empathy, and firm boundaries. Even children began noticing the gate as more than just a barrier. I saw them respecting it, understanding it as a protected space. For me, this reinforced a critical lesson. Boundaries, when communicated and enforced with respect, benefit everyone. The extreme event for this chapter occurred one late Friday night. I was upstairs reviewing security footage when the motion detector lights flashed, illuminating the yard with a harsh, bright glare. My heart sank as I recognized the figure immediately. Karen, returning with a new set of tools, this time carrying a small sledgehammer. I called 911 without hesitation, remaining calm and observing the scene. She approached the gate cautiously, testing the reinforced locks and attempting to pry the steel panels. Buster barked furiously, running around the yard in protective circles. The siren from the alarm system triggered, a loud, piercing sound that made her hesitate. Karen cursed and threw the sledgehammer to the ground, trying to lift it again. The motion sensor alerts had already notified the police. Within minutes, multiple patrol cars arrived, lights flashing, and officers quickly approached her. She froze in place, realizing she had been caught yet again, attempting serious property damage this time. The following morning, I inspected the gate. Minor dents and scratches were visible, but the reinforced structure had held firm. The psychological impact, however, was another matter. Karen's obsession had escalated to dangerous levels. This was no longer about petty disputes. It was harassment, vandalism, and a test of my patience and vigilance. I took the opportunity to clean the scratches, reinforcing the gate with an additional protective coating. I also installed extra cameras at different angles, ensuring that any future attempts would be fully documented. Each act of preparation gave me more confidence, more control, and a sense of empowerment. Over the next few days, I continued to engage with neighbors. I shared the lessons I had learned about calm persistence and empathy while enforcing boundaries. Many were inspired, recognizing that aggression and anger often escalate conflicts rather than resolve them. Some admitted that they had been afraid to confront Karen in the past, but my approach had shown that patience, strategic planning, and legal preparedness were powerful tools. Even HOA board members began to discuss formal measures, considering restrictions on Karen's behavior in the neighborhood. My documentation, calm demeanor, and clear communication had shifted their perspective. Karen was becoming isolated, and her influence over others was diminishing. Despite these positive developments, the final extreme event for this chapter reminded me that vigilance could never fully cease. One evening, as I sat on the porch, Buster growled softly at the edge of the yard. Through the security monitor, I saw a shadowy figure approaching the gate. My stomach tightened. It was Karen again, carrying a small toolbox and a long metal rod. She paused at the gate, examining the locks and the reinforced panels. Her frustration was palpable. She had been unable to breach the property through force, deception, or psychological manipulation. Yet, she persisted, testing my patience and boundaries with each attempt. I immediately alerted the police, stayed inside, and monitored her movements. Buster barked continuously, the siren from the alarm system blaring as Karen tried to insert the metal rod into a gap near the hinges. The officers arrived quickly, catching her in the act. She could not claim ignorance or accidental intrusion this time. Attempted property damage, harassment, and repeated trespassing were well documented, and Karen was finally escorted away. As the night quieted, I walked the yard, inspecting the gate, fences, and security systems. Minor damage was repairable, but the psychological impact of repeated threats lingered. I realized that this experience had strengthened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had maintained calm, exercised empathy, and yet remained firm and prepared. The extreme events had taught me resilience, and the subtle manipulations had taught me vigilance. The gate, once just a piece of metal, had become a symbol of strategy, patience, and the balance between kindness and firmness. By the time Chapter 10 began, the neighborhood had settled into a strange rhythm, one of cautious calm, punctuated by the memory of Karen's relentless trespassing and harassment. The reinforced gate stood tall and secure, a silent sentinel of months of strategy, patience, and resilience. But despite the physical security, I knew the final showdown with Karen was yet to come. Obsessions like hers did not disappear overnight. They simmered, often finding new ways to challenge boundaries. The morning started peacefully. I walked around the yard with Buster, inspecting the flower beds, watering the plants, and enjoying the chirping of birds. The sun reflected off the gate's polished steel, highlighting its sturdy construction. Each lock, each hinge, and each security camera told the story of preparation, determination, and vigilance. This wasn't just a gate anymore. It was the embodiment of everything I had learned about boundaries, empathy, and patience. The HOA board had begun taking more proactive measures. After my detailed presentations of Karen's repeated trespassing, harassment, and attempts at property damage, they had issued formal warnings and were discussing permanent restrictions on her access to neighborhood properties. This development gave me a sense of relief. Though I knew Karen might attempt one last dramatic move, neighbors had started to watch subtly, forming a quiet, supportive network. Some offered to keep an eye on the street at night, while others simply checked in with kind words and encouragement. I realized that standing firm with empathy not only protected my property but also inspired the community. By maintaining patience and calmness, I had set an example of resilience and strategy. Over the next few days, subtle reminders of Karen's presence continued. A misplaced garden tool here, a note under the gate there. But these small acts, while unsettling, no longer caused panic. I documented everything carefully, photographing, filing, and reporting to the police when necessary. The pattern was clear, and I now had a system to manage her harassment without losing control. I also spent time reflecting on the lessons of the past months. Karen's obsession had tested my patience, my vigilance, and my ability to respond with calm strategy instead of anger. Through it all, I had learned the power of empathy, the importance of setting clear boundaries, and the value of preparation. Every act of harassment had been an opportunity to respond thoughtfully, rather than impulsively. Then came the first major event of the final chapter. One night, around 11 p.m., the motion sensor lights activated, illuminating the yard with a bright, sudden glare. Through the security feed, I saw Karen approaching again, this time more determined than ever. She carried a large toolbox and a crowbar, her steps calculated and deliberate. I called 911 immediately, reporting the situation and describing her previous attempts. Buster barked fiercely, running along the perimeter, as if sensing the stakes. The alarm system remained silent for the moment, but the motion sensor lights and security cameras had already captured everything. Karen circled the gate, inspecting the locks and testing the reinforced steel panels. Her frustration was evident. Her breathing quickened as she muttered under her breath. Every action she took was precise but increasingly desperate. She attempted to wedge the crowbar between the panels, but the reinforced construction held firm. Within minutes, police patrol cars arrived, flashing lights illuminating the yard and the street. Karen froze, realizing she had been caught in the act once again. Her frustration turned to panic. She tried to argue, claiming she was checking the gate for safety. But the officers had a clear record: repeated trespassing, attempted property damage, and harassment. This time, however, the event escalated to something more extreme. Karen, in a sudden burst of anger, swung the crowbar forcefully at the gate. The metal groaned under the impact, but it held firm. The sound echoed through the neighborhood, alerting nearby neighbors to the danger. Buster barked incessantly, circling the yard protectively, while I remained calm, documenting every second on the security feed. The officers immediately intervened, instructing Karen to drop the crowbar. She hesitated, her anger and obsession clashing with the reality of being caught, yet again. Eventually, she complied, and the police escorted her away, ensuring she could not attempt further immediate intrusions. The morning after the event, I walked the yard with Buster. Minor dents were visible on the reinforced steel, but nothing compromised the gate's integrity. I repaired and polished the scratches carefully, reflecting on the lessons this ordeal had taught me. Each extreme event, each subtle harassment, had strengthened my patience, strategic thinking, and empathy. I also realized that the gate had become a symbol for the neighborhood. It wasn't just about protecting my property. It was a demonstration of resilience, preparation, and the power of calm persistence. By standing firm without resorting to anger, I had shown that boundaries could be enforced with dignity and strategy, inspiring others to do the same. Over the next week, I focused on consolidating my security measures. I installed an additional backup alarm, reinforced hinges, and a silent notification system that would alert me and the police if any tampering occurred. I also scheduled a neighborhood meeting, inviting neighbors to discuss property safety, boundaries, and respectful coexistence. During the meeting, I emphasized empathy and patience. Setting boundaries is not cruelty, I told them. It's a necessary part of protecting yourself, your property, and your peace of mind. You can remain firm while still being kind. That balance is the most powerful tool we have. The neighbors listened intently, asking questions about the gate, the security measures, and strategies to maintain calm in difficult situations. Some admitted they had felt intimidated by Karen in the past, but my approach had inspired confidence. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the community was united in supporting safe boundaries and discouraging harassment. The final extreme event of the story occurred a few nights later. Karen, undeterred by previous interventions, attempted one last intrusion. Through the security feed, I saw her approaching with a small ladder, tools, and what looked like industrial adhesive. Her plan was clear: bypass the locks, scale the gate, and assert dominance over the property she had repeatedly failed to enter. I remained calm, calling the police immediately. Buster barked fiercely, sensing the tension. Karen placed the ladder against the gate and began to climb, but before she could reach the top, the motion sensor alarms activated. Bright floodlights illuminated the yard, catching her off guard. The police arrived within minutes, lights flashing, and officers quickly apprehended her. Karen had no room to maneuver. She had exhausted all her tactics: brute force, subtle intimidation, psychological manipulation. Each extreme event of the past months had prepared me and the neighborhood for this moment. This final confrontation demonstrated the culmination of patience, strategy, and community support. In the quiet aftermath, I walked the yard, inspecting the gate and the surrounding security measures. Minor scuffs were repaired. The garden bloomed brightly in the morning sun, and Buster wagged his tail happily. The neighborhood, now reassured, expressed gratitude and admiration. I realized that the gate, initially purchased as a practical solution, had become a symbol of resilience, patience, and empathy. Karen's obsession had tested my limits, but it also taught the neighborhood and me the importance of standing firm with kindness, preparation, and strategy. Months of harassment, extreme events, and subtle intimidation had culminated in this moment. The property was secure, boundaries were respected, and the lessons were clear. Vigilance, empathy, patience, and calm strategic action are more powerful than anger or retaliation. As I stood there, the gate gleaming in the sunlight, I reflected on the journey. Each day of tension had been a test, each event an opportunity to grow stronger and wiser. The extreme highs and subtle lows of the past months had forged resilience, strategic thinking, and community solidarity. And finally, with the gate standing tall, the neighborhood watching in quiet admiration, and Karen's harassment halted, I understood a simple truth. Boundaries are not just about property. They are about respect, empathy, and the courage to protect what is yours without compromising your values. Where are you watching from?
We don't want any more incidents.